Each week for the next 3 weeks, we are going to give you kind of horror stories. Rather than talking about cybersecurity as a product or the technical elements of it, instead, we're going to educate you by creating stories. We're going to tell you what happens what it looks like when something really goes wrong. We're going to tell you about the steps that have been taken to get businesses through those scenarios and what lessons can be learned in each case. We're going to do that with 3 different stories, and we're going to get it from the man, Matt O'Kane, who is the person people call when things go wrong in this space. Matt, welcome.
How you going, Brendan?
I'm good, man. I'm glad you actually got here. Thank you, Qantas, eventually.
They're all right.
They're all right. Please don't sue us. So the people watching should know. Give us the sort of TLDR on why you know so much about cybersecurity, why you're the person that big companies call when things go wrong, and how you became an expert in the space.
So my specialties is cyber resilience. So that's planning for when things go wrong and helping companies bounce back really quickly. Mm-hmm. And incident response and digital forensics. And what that means is digital forensics is helping workplaces answer questions. So did the head of sales take the list of customers? Did the CFO sell secrets to the competition? So we try and help people answer those questions by studying their machines or monitoring their machines. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is we help people recover after a breach.
Okay.
So you end up getting a cyber breach. Your IT team or your MSP then contacts me and my team, and then we go in and we apply a standard, which is it's an international standard to how to handle the breach. So we get you the best possible result under the circumstances.
Got it. Right.
And so how did I get into that is probably what
I'd love to know. It's a specialist field.
So I started in computer programming, and I've always had the belief that to do this at the highest level, to do incident response and digital forensics at the highest level, you've got to have a real hands-on understanding of the ones and zeros.
That's me out then. Fair enough. That's fine. Look, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love it. I think it's so I started there, and then I got involved in a couple of cases to offer a second opinion. Mm-hmm. And after I did that, a couple of law firms asked me to come in and run a couple of investigations, and it grew from there.
Okay. Right, let's get stuck into story 1 then. Which one do you want to lead off with? How about you set the scene
let me introduce. So I'll tell you a story about a case. Now, I just want to explain that the cases are used with permission, but I've changed key facts to protect the confidentiality of the customer.
Any similarity to people past or present is purely coincidental.
That's right. So let me tell you about a franchise business. So what these franchise business did, they had about 120 branches, and they all run out of an office in regional Australia. Yep. And the office had one of these old rack-mounted computer setups in the office, and it was air conditioned and it was really beautiful. But they decided to change technology partners.
Okay.
And so what they did was they reached out to a new partner, and the new partner wanted to move them to the cloud. And so what happened was they, because this is in the middle of regional Australia, they wanted to be sure that they could transfer the accounting information for all of these franchises. Mm-hmm. So they did it over a couple of weeks. It was about maybe 3 terabytes or so. And so they transferred it up into the particular cloud provider. Mm-hmm. And so when the new technology partner started setting up the cloud service, they got really busy. So they outsourced it to someone else halfway through the job. Oof. And then a second partner got really busy. Ugh. And they outsourced it to someone else.
Okay.
So at this point, there's 3 people that are now working at a new cloud setup that has about 2 to 3 terabytes of information, right? So there's 3 different companies that have the main login. Now, it's not unusual during the setup phases for there to be a little bit of account sharing between technical people, right?
Yeah.
But it's unusual for that administrative account to be shared so widely.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that. Yeah. So, okay, good.
That's unusual. Yeah. So you really want to get really as close as humanly possible to the inception. You want to make sure that individuals have their own logins. Now, it'll become apparent why in a second.
Yeah.
So what happened was, And they were doing it with the best of intentions. So no one here was acting in a bad way, right? Everyone was trying to do their best.
Yeah, no, so malactors.
Yeah, there's no malactors, except for the criminals that came in. Right?
Later.
So what happened was, they set it up, and one of the things that was part of this accounting system setup was a remote desktop service. And so what that allows is it means instead of having, software installed on computers all throughout Australia and New Zealand, this was in the data center running on a system, and people remoted in to access that system. And so anyway, the port for that was left open overnight for about 12 hours. So the person set up that service, and they said, okay, we'll fix up all the authentication things in the morning, and we'll come back and look at it then. Unfortunately, during that 12-hour window, criminals identified the open port.
Is that because of just proactive scanning, constantly just looking for open ports? They're just out there just smashing everything.
That's a good question. It's if you run a server, and it's actually frightening how frequently your public servers or public facing internet infrastructure is being probed.
Right.
It's happening constantly.
Yeah.
We're talking about sometimes it's like 10 times a minute, sometimes it's hundreds of times a minute.
Oh.
But it's like it doesn't cost very much to set up a computer, but literally scans the internet and looking for open ports. Or you could subscribe to a service that gives you like a little feed that says, guess what? Here's a newly open port that you can explore. And these dual purpose services.
Well, I guess there's positive actors out there who are doing the same thing to try and proactively advise people about known vulnerabilities and open ports and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it makes sense. There's people doing the exact same thing with the exact opposite intention. So yeah. No,
you're right. Because let's say we're in a neighborhood, right? We can look around a neighborhood, and in order to burgle a house, you have to go to individual houses to do it.
Yeah.
But you automate that writ large, and you just have to find a house that's not very well secured, and it's over. And that's what happened here. So what happened was that people started a password guesser on that service. So a password guesser can get through hundreds of thousands of guesses every few hours, and until they found the password. Now, the particular password for this case, do you know what leet is? Do you know what leet text is?
Yeah.
So when you write like the word Brendan, you might go B, instead of a B, you might put an 8. E, instead of E, you might put a 3.
Okay.
And so on and so forth. So it swaps out things that look like the text.
Yeah. Okay.
So some technical people use that, and they used a leet password of a very easily guessed IT thing,
right,
in order to secure that server. So it was very easily guessed.
Okay.
So it was guessed within the 12 hours, and then so they got in, they identified this big pool of data, and then the next morning when the new team logs in, they see this very scary ransom note on the desktop, and it says, "We've done and they usually say something along the lines of this: we've done some penetration testing, and we found a problem, and we should get paid for our services." Now, this is what a criminal's saying. Right? and in order to release this file, you've got 4 days. You need to contact us to start talking about how to release it, and they give their customer service link.
Meanwhile, no one in that business can work.
Well, because now this is a weird situation. Yeah. What was lucky about this was, remember, we're moving from one technology partner to another, so it's during migration.
Okay, so some people have been successfully migrated already.
That's right.
Okay.
So there was the company had a bit of leeway, and one of the trends at the particular time, just a couple of years ago, instead of the criminals encrypting every file, which takes a long time, after all, these people are busy. They make it look like every file is encrypted. So they rename all the files, and they encrypt the ones that you're most likely to. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So they're trying to use as many terror tactics as they can to try and really put the pressure on you to act quickly and pay the money.
Okay. So you often get people who may be unnecessarily freaking out. Like, yes, it's a bad situation.
That's right.
Yes, there's some very real impact, but it's usually been overblown to a certain extent or exaggerated when you first get involved, or just in this one case, it was just a uniquely uniquely sort of underblown situation, as it were?
Look, it really depends. Like, firstly, we can't underestimate the impact of these criminal acts, right? And we can't underplay them. But at the same time, we have to be very rational in our response and very measured in our response. And it's not, when people approach us for post-breach help, we're seeing a very wide range of behaviors. People are having some of the worst days in their life, right? Yeah. And so you can understand people being stressed.
Yeah, especially if they think it might be due to an action of theirs. There's that. Am I just a bystander here who's impacted, or am I potentially at fault? is probably the terrifying difference.
Look, a lot of people worry about that, and my response to that is always the same. It's important to remember that if this happens to you, you're a victim of crime.
Right. That's good.
Now, is there anything you could have done to improve it? Sure, potentially.
Yeah.
But the starting point in any analysis is that you're the victim, and you have to bear that in mind.
I always tell everyone I'm the victim, regardless. So everyone should always feel sorry for me. Okay, so in this particular case, right? So bang, they've essentially left the port open.
Yep.
Then that's been exploited or hacked essentially over a very brief period of time.
Yep.
They get this notice up on the screen.
Yep.
Hey, that's happened. Then what?
Okay. So we follow the process. There's a National Institute of Standards of Technology, part of the US Department of Commerce, and they have a standard called 80061R2.
I'm sure they do.
And they have a standard. Sounds boring, but what it is what we're trying to do is, okay, if it was a breach about 5 years ago, you'd have an IT team go in and they'd look at the system and they'd try to do their best to identify the actor and expunge the actor, and this is something they don't do as a everyday thing. So it's a one-off thing, and so they're doing the best they can, but they're not doing it in a structure, and they're not doing it in a way that could provide you, because what you need to do in a breach in the modern era is you need to show you took every reasonable step to mitigate the damage.
Okay.
Right. So that's kind of
is that even just for insurance coverage? Is that for in case there's third parties impacted, like all those kind of things? Like,
why do I have to do that? Well, firstly, it's because I think as a society, society's views are changing on this, right? So if we go back, and I'm not a lawyer, so I need to preface that.
Okay.
But before the Optus sort of case, there was very few. In fact, I think there's only one class action about a data breach, right? And I think there was awarded about $250,000 for the class, a very small in comparison. And then after Optus, there's more scrutiny on these things. Instead of saying, okay, a cyber crime is a lightning strike, there's more government oversight, and I'm seeing that in recent 2024 and 2025 cases where during the breach response, you'll get different government departments. You might be on a Zoom call with 70, 80, 90 people, or a Teams call rather, with 70, 80, 90 people, and they're all firing questions at the incident responder, right? And the customer's freaking out. They're going, why is there so many people just firing questions, right? And I keep on having to remind the people, the victim, it's like, you're the victim here. Help where you can, but remember, they're just trying to do their job. But you need to also remember that, this is not you're the victim. You have
it seems like a bit of a mix between, hey, just remember, you're the victim of a crime here, but it's also like, but you better be a victim who's been following best practice. Like it's a bit of a balancing act.
It's interesting you bring up that, because I talk about, so I don't work with big business. I work mostly with small, medium businesses, right? And I advise some big businesses on cyber resilience. But it's so you might have a business and they're very good at what they do. They might be Australian leading or world leading at what they do, right? And they're doing the best they can with cyber, and good on them, right? But like every field, cyber, there's a whole range of advice you can get, and sometimes they might not get the best advice, and they've done the best they can. No one goes into this with the intention of losing, customer data. Everyone's trying to do the best they can. The real trick for businesses is to try and sort out the sensible and good and cost-effective advice from from other advice, and that's actually very challenging to do. Yeah, and that's why we always go back to standards. You say, well, look, a standard's a good place to start with that analysis.
Yeah. All right, what I want to do now with the last part of this first episode of 3 with this particular story, I'm keen for you to tell us the steps they took to get out of this bind, and then the lessons that were learned and any consequences, longer term consequences that were experienced.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. So, firstly, the big question is, are they still in the network? So you've got a question, are they in the technology partners network? And remember, they shared the administrator password to 2 other technology companies. So I think in this particular, it was at 10 o'clock at night. I'm analyzing this and I've got to make a decision. And my decision is it confined to one company's network, or is it potentially on one of 3 companies' network? And am I calling up those companies to say, let's scan your machines for problems? Right. One of the misconceptions that people have sometimes is that a virus scanner is proof against any cyber attack. That's really not the case.
No.
So even if someone's system's compromised, their virus, unless they've got really strong controls on their machine to prevent things from running or prevent unauthorized stuff from running, the virus scanner has a 50-50 chance of finding things on thereabouts. Right? So I'm having to make a decision. So put yourself in the shoes of someone who's been working on this for a few hours. It's 10 o'clock on Friday, and you need to decide who we're going to call. So these are the kind of discussions we're having with clients. It's like, on the balance of probabilities, we're always looking for more evidence so we can help them make an informed decision. But after we examine a couple of more servers, we're able to make the finding, yes, it's confined to this particular cloud instance and it hasn't spread anywhere else. So the first thing you need to do is reach containment.
Okay.
And once you reach containment, life becomes a lot easier to manage, right? So containment is the name of the game, and having the evidence to show that you've reached containment. You don't always reach it. You get there maybe 80, 90% of the time, but you want to get to containment. And then once you get there, you can eradicate it and you can try and find out what was taken. And there's the next steps, because you have obligations where you need to, even if you ignoring the whole legal thing.
Yeah.
I always say to customers, you've had information taken. What you should do is tell the victims. And the reason I say that is to help them prepare. And secondly, it makes you proof against double extortion, because one of the things that happens is they encrypt the files, and if you pay, I don't say ever pay a ransom, but there's only ever been 2 cases where I've said, oh, maybe you should look at it, right? But mostly it's bad advice. You have to, let's say you pay the ransom. The scientific studies show that about a third of the time they come back for more in about a few months, and they say, guess what? We have a backup of your data.
We're going to sell it. No.
And so you want to try and avoid that, if that makes sense. So if you tell your customers, they can't do that because they can't blackmail you against it.
So criminals don't have a conscience. That's horrible.
Turns out you can't go to your state's small claims tribunal and
dispute it. But I paid this ransom. Okay, so in this particular case with this non-fictional but heavily disguised company, did they get any justice? And what was the sort of financial outcome, or even financial outcome? I guess encapsulates probably all the potential fallouts.
Look, okay, so justice is tricky. Police are overwhelmed, and international crime is notoriously difficult to prosecute once it crosses a jurisdictional boundary.
I remember Carmen San Diego. That's how I learned that. But yeah, that was the whole thing. Yeah, sorry, Carmen.
Carmen San Diego was a great game. That was. Yeah. So that's one thing. But how much did it cost them in the end? They owned up to their stakeholders, and as far as I know, everyone is pretty understanding.
Okay.
And I think if it depends. Obviously, every situation is different. But people understand, what's happening in the modern world, and I think that every situation is different. But in that situation, they talked about it and are able to, while people obviously didn't think it was ideal, they got a lot of empathy and understanding.
Last question on this particular story before we do a hard cut and we go to number 2.
Yeah.
Is what's changed in that business's approach to cybersecurity and IT generally since that experience, culturally, in terms of actions? What have you seen change?
I talk about 3 things, but one of the things is a culture of safety.
Mm-hmm.
So in the workplace, what's awesome about the modern Australian 21st century workplace is that if you go to work, you don't get there's very little chance of having an industrial accident. That wasn't true in the 20th century, and it definitely wasn't true in the 19th. We've built this safety culture into our workplaces, and so if someone sees something unsafe, they usually say, "Look, that's unsafe. Let's fix it." We don't have that with data yet, and partly because we don't know how to be safe, so we need to educate people on how to be safe. And for data sets, there's a few things. There's like removing identifiable information if you're doing marketing analysis. There's a few things, right? But people don't know how to be safe yet fully, and people can't spot risks. And if we can help people do that, I think if we can really introduce from the top down a culture of data safety, it beats putting in a million rules. If we could just instill that safety culture, I think that's what's happened here. They've said, okay, what can we do to not expose these kind of devices directly to the internet? If we have to, how do we minimize the risk? And they're really good questions to answer, right?
Nice.
By a culture, a culture of safety, data safety.
Nice. Danny, I reckon there's a good short form bit of content in there about that whole workplace safety. So nice analogy. And not to break down the fourth wall here, but I'm going to keep Matt sitting exactly where he is, but I'm going to take a break there. You guys can come back next week. We're going to do the second part of the story. Well, not second part of the story, an entirely different story that we can hopefully take actionable insights from. Again, learning by listening. See you soon.